Gus Chikala, the President and CEO of Project Assistance. Gus founded Project Assistance in 1996 to provide unique, leading-edge project and portfolio management solutions that enable organizations to deliver better, faster, more cost-effective project-based solutions. A recognized portfolio and project management expert, Gus is a published author of many popular articles and books on the subject of project and portfolio management, and he's frequently asked to present and teach topics of interest around PPM. Gus?
Thank you, Jan. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning for those on the West Coast, or lunchtime on the West Coast. I'd like to start off today by reviewing our agenda. So what we're going to do is on this topic of getting ROI out of your EPM investment, we first want to talk about process, the kinds of processes that are necessary in order to enable these solutions to be effective. We'll then take that process down to the process of converting project management input into project management output. We'll then do a demonstration of some of the business intelligence concepts we're talking about today using Microsoft Project Server 2010. And then we'll spend a little bit of time on how you create and adopt a vision to actually be able to achieve the benefits that we're talking about today, the return on investment. So to get started, I love this quote from Stephen Covey, to begin with the end in mind. When we're talking about dashboards, we're talking about output. And when we talk about output, what I want to do is just use a brief analogy. And the brief analogy is that, you know, process theory, if I were to relate that to the baking of a cake, we would have some components to process. So you see across the bottom here, you see the input, which are the eggs, flour, chocolate, and a picture of the end result, which is also a common input. Let me see what the end state is supposed to look like so I know what I'm shooting for, what's the target. We then see some transforming steps. If we had an actual recipe here, we would see the steps like cracking open the eggs and using the mixer and that kind of business. And then we have the output itself, which is the cake. So today's analogy really relates to this idea of, you know, having this cake, this dashboard, and how do we get there? You know, what are the inputs? What are the transforming steps that need to happen? And then there's also, in addition to the process itself that converts the inputs to the outputs, we have something like a RACI matrix. If you were in the kitchen, you probably wouldn't have a RACI matrix taped up to your kitchen cabinet, but in the concept of project management process, we would have some idea of who the resources are, who the people are who are involved in this process. So we would have folks that are responsible overall for the process or for pieces of the process. We would have accountability. Who's the one person I point to who's going to be accountable for making sure this happens? Who gets consulted and who gets informed? So in this case, we have more than we would think. Instead of just the person doing the cooking, we maybe have somebody doing the shopping for the ingredients. We maybe have an electrician to make sure that the infrastructure is available. We might even have an appliance dealer to make sure that we have an oven. And those responsibilities are reflected in the infrastructure itself, the oven, the mixer, the electricity, the refrigerator, the plates. So that thought in mind is really what frames up the concept for today. We have this beautiful cake with the candles on it and the wonderful icing that we want to be able to blow out and celebrate. And so we also have a motivation, in this case, a birthday party. So let's take that to the world of project management. In the world of project management, if we looked at, for example, the RACI matrix, we would have project managers, team members, executives, stakeholders, and the input, transforming steps, and output would look something like, on the input side, we would expect to have something like maybe methodology artifacts. By methodology artifacts, I mean, for example, if this was a status reporting procedure, we would expect to have a status reporting template. Optimal deliverable examples, that's the picture of the birthday cake, right? So if we had, if we were building a scope definition document for a project, we might like to see not only the template that I'm expected to fill out for a scope definition document, but maybe a shining example of how one of these has been done in the past. So an optimal deliverable example, or examples, depending on how many different artifacts we're filling in. And then oftentimes, the transforming steps that we see in the middle, the project management processes, oftentimes are rendered as inputs as well. We might be given, for example, a sample work breakdown structure or a Microsoft project template that says, when you build a scope definition, here are the tasks you're expected to perform. And for the RACI matrix, we may even see these roles and responsibilities assigned to those tasks. So we would take those inputs, put them through some level of project management process, and we would see the outputs, the deliverables, the dashboards, whatever that happens to be, depending on the project management process. The motivation, usually the motivation for a project comes from strategy. So I love simple definitions, and the definition I like most that I've heard for strategy that's very simple is a plan for change. So at the top of the pyramid here, we have this thing called a portfolio, a group of projects that are really intended to be a plan for change. When we look at the kinds of things organizations, the reasons why organizations do projects is usually to achieve a vision, to achieve some goals for the organization. So we would typically see things like revenue enhancement, cost reduction, opening new markets, bringing on new customers. Those kinds of things are usually the kinds of motivation for a business strategy that would drive the creation of projects, the selection and approval through a portfolio process. And so therefore, we would use these project management processes to really drive that change. That plan for change, in fact, means that the project is the catalyst or the vessel that the organization travels in to get to that vision out on the horizon. So let's be more specific. In a specific project management process, and then the ones we're going to talk about today, we would talk about, for example, maybe a baseline project, or actual progress, or updates to estimate complete. Now, why am I saying that? I would say begin with the end in mind. And the end in mind, in today's example, we're going to talk about really three primary different kinds of dashboard output, or the most common executive views that might need to be summarized in a portfolio of projects. So if we look at the output or the business intelligence that an organization might be looking for to see what's going on in its projects, we would have things like schedule variances, labor variances, or cost variances, possibly budget variances based on labor, resource capacity gaps, so capacity versus demand and where are we coming up short. So if we think about those kinds of outputs, these kinds of common views we would see in a dashboard, we look at the transforming steps that would have to take the inputs and turn them into the outputs. So there would be some hopefully established processes for how we capture the baseline for a project, how we update those projects to create the variances, how we do that for both schedule and labor and maybe cost in addition to that, how we put actual progress in against the projects to generate those variances, how we see not only the actual progress for labor but also for cost. So again, what we typically have is some kind of a project management infrastructure that would be process and methodology. It would be hopefully capable project managers capable of executing this process, as well as some enabling technology, which we'll look at in a moment. And the motivation, again, is that goal, that organizational goal that says we're doing this project because we're looking to drive revenue, cut costs, open new markets, acquire new customers. And then, of course, the RACI would be those folks we talked about on the previous slide, the project managers, the stakeholders, the team members, the executives. So let's get a little bit more specific here. So in order to convert project management input into project management output, we're going to have to go through this sort of process theory. So the first question is, what processes and inputs are necessary to derive meaningful project management output? What is it that the organization is looking for from the projects? And again, if we look at, from a portfolio standpoint, the question of, well, what is it that the organization cares about? I would summarize that by saying the organization cares about success. Right, so there's a couple of ways to define success in this scenario. One, and the most common way that we would see a project manager driving success would be the typical definition of a successful project: on time, on budget, on spec. The interesting thing about this as well, and we'll show just a few examples of this, is this idea of not only does the project need to be on time, on budget, on spec, or delivered with high quality, but what about the reason it was initially conceived? In other words, it was initially conceived because the organization was looking to change the way it does business in some way. That plan for change, that strategy, was being utilized to bring the organization into a new world. So what might that be? Well, it might be some level of return on investment. It might be to capture some percentage of market share. It might be to have some specific new kind of client come into the client list for the organization. So we have those other things as well. And you'll see when we get to some of the bubble charts, that would be measuring success beyond the typical measurements that we ask a project manager to follow in terms of on time, on budget, on spec. Okay, so just a couple of examples here. Resource capacity versus resource demand, and what's the gap. Analyzing missed project schedule commitments or forecasting missed project schedule commitments. So the idea of either we had a key milestone that was supposed to start or supposed to finish, and it hasn't, or even what project management tools allow us to do is to forecast the variance. Right? So if, for example, a simple example is if we had a person working on a 40-hour task and their actual work so far was 25 hours, and they report there's 25 left to go. I had 40. They did 25. They have 25 left to go. Now they're saying 50, but they're not done yet. Right? So I've got a baseline of 40. I've got a current estimate of 50, but I'm not done yet. So what can I do proactively? So some of these missed schedule commitments can be forecasted misses, maybe things we can be proactive about. And then analyzing unfavorable budget variances. Again, they can be forecast as well. We may be halfway through a spend and think we're going to miss the original budget, but we're not done spending yet. So maybe something can be done with scope, for example. So some of these dashboards actually give us a proactive view of the world. Okay, so what are the processes and inputs? That's what the slide says. What are the processes and inputs that are necessary to derive meaningful portfolio and project management output? And so let's take the first example: resource capacity versus resource demand. So the output is capacity versus demand. The input would be obviously some level of stating what the capacity is. That's the inventory, if you will, the available inventory of people, their available inventory of time. Typically, in a tool like Microsoft Project, rendered through the calendar. We could use something like the max units field as well. That puts kind of a high watermark on, if somebody's only available 50% of the time, we could make their max units 0.5. The other way we can do that is we can show them only available between 8 a.m. and noon on Monday through Friday. But at the end of the day, the idea is there's some level of input required, some level of accuracy required. If we want to be able to state capacity accurately, that implies a couple of things. It implies, for example, a complete inventory of the resources that would be involved. It actually assumes that we have a philosophy in terms of whether we're going to track resource capacity by individual named resource, by people, by their actual names, whether we're going to do it by maybe role, by department. So all these decisions have an impact on the level of input, the level of granularity, the amount of effort that's required in order to have an accurate statement of resource capacity. Demand is even a little bit trickier. Demand in most projects would be estimating the labor at the task level, right? So if I have this inventory of people called capacity, this inventory has a limitation in terms of how many orders it can fill, right? So we see that demand as a necessary input. And what are the processes? Well, and this is where it gets tricky, right? The processes are the project manager maintenance of resource demand, and project management, probably resource manager maintenance of resource capacity, right? So project managers placing the order on demand, resource managers stating what the capacity is for their organization, for example, to be able to deliver against the summary of all the demand out there, and assuming that we have all this information correct. So we've got the inputs, we've got the processes. Why does it matter? Well, without this information, and this is a big challenge for BI, building the dashboards themselves is the easy part, right? The why it matters part is the hard part, right? The dashboard, the question you could ask is, well, why doesn't it matter? Well, dashboards don't matter when they're not accurate. So if I don't have a good set of inputs and I don't have a bunch of project managers and resource managers following the process, the dashboard becomes worthless. The other thing that matters is when you look at why senior management cares about resource capacity. You know, it's kind of the keystone, if you will, between project and portfolio managers. You know, the portfolio folks, when they get asked, you know, how come we're not delivering on our commitments, oftentimes the answer is either we didn't have a good handle on what the resource needs were and it changed, or the resource demands were accurate, but the resources didn't show up. So if we don't complete our active projects, we can't initiate new projects. Okay, so all this churn around capacity and demand is really a focus on the inputs and the processes that you know, quite simply can be rendered into the output. I mean, Microsoft Project has a you know, a great engine for pulling that input and rendering it as output. It's really, you know, quite simple to go into the databases and mine that information. The question is it accurate, right? So the challenge we have here is that we need uniform advanced resource management capacity capabilities for the project manager and for the tool, right? Advanced resource management capabilities. Okay, we need the capacity and the capability of project managers to actually utilize the tool. And a big part of this is, you know, when we see these technologies being rolled out by organizations, almost always, nearly 100% of the time, organizations are using a technology like a Microsoft Project, a Microsoft Project Server, to enable a greater level of rigor, a greater level of maturity, if you will, in the processes of the projects. So when we see this introduction of this advanced technology as an enabler, the question is, are the project managers even able to do these inputs, to follow these processes, to make it uniform across the organization? Or is the governance body who's in charge of the portfolio ready, willing, and able, and armed with the right budgets and capacity and time to get that accurate and timely input from all projects? So those challenges are real, and just something we wanted to focus on before we jump right into talking about the dashboards. This idea of the webinar itself, you know, the title of Leveraging Business Intelligence, Realizing the ROI from the Investment, is really all about this, getting the inputs, processes, and outputs right. The next example, analyzing missed project schedule commitments. Again, we have this idea that we need inputs on the original schedule, we need inputs on the updated schedule, and we have to have a solid process for baselining and updating the schedule. Okay, now this might sound simple, but anybody who's tried to do this with a large group of project managers realizes pretty quickly that the project managers often don't know how to do this in the tool accurately. They don't quite understand exactly how the schedule gets updated. They don't understand, for example, when I mark a task 100% complete in Microsoft Project, the Microsoft Project, in fact, copies my schedule date to my actual schedule date. So if I had no variances in my project plan, if I mark a task as 1% complete, project says you must have started, so it copies the scheduled start date to the actual start date. When I complete it by marking it 100% complete or changing remaining work to 0, it copies the estimated schedule date into the actual schedule date. And so if we have a baseline, there's no variances. If we have baseline but we haven't updated those schedules, project automatically copies the schedule into the actual, and therefore there's no variance. So it can be pretty mysterious to project managers how all this works. So again, we're relying on not only the original schedule having accuracy, but the schedule being updated against the baseline. So why does it matter? Well, without it, the dashboard's worthless, same as the previous one, and it really validates a commitment to on schedule. Right? At the end of the day, it matters because why do we have this dashboard? Well, clearly, senior management must have some sense as to whether the investment they've made in this portfolio is in fact producing the results that were expected. And oh, by the way, if we see trouble signs early, we can maybe make some decisions early as to whether or not this investment is still a good investment. So what's the challenge? Well, we need a consistent approach for defining standard milestones, the first one. Right? So when senior management looks across a set of dashboards or a set of active projects in a portfolio, one of the first questions they might ask is, give me a standard view of everything that's in design. Give me a standard view of everything that's in QA. Give me a standard view of everything that's coming down to final approval or implementation, go live, if you will, or we're ready for market. Okay, so one of the first challenges is how do we define the standard milestones. Capturing baselines, I mentioned that already, is a challenge. Why is it a challenge? Well, capturing a baseline is in fact a project manager formally and sometimes voluntarily committing to accountability. As soon as we baseline a plan, we've got a snapshot we can measure the schedule against, which implies that as soon as something goes wrong, we have a variance, and when we start asking who we're going to point to, the answer is the project manager. Okay, so if you ask a project manager when they'd want to baseline a project, they'd say close to the end, because that's when I have some level of certainty about when things are going to happen. So it's a little bit uncomfortable to capture these things early, or even a process that says, for example, we only capture a certain horizon. We only capture this phase plus one more. Maybe we don't capture the entire baseline for the schedule. Maybe that's one approach. And then, of course, the updating and reporting schedule being standard and uniform across the organization. And as I mentioned, the project managers are reticent to commit to an uncertain baseline. The next one we want to talk about is very much the same as the schedule, and that is variances against the budget. The reason I say it's very much the same is obviously if the schedule's going wrong, oftentimes the budget's going with it. If it's taking us longer to get something done, there's a good chance we're spending more money than we anticipated. So again, we have these inputs of the original labor and costs and the updated labor and costs, the same challenges with baselining and updating. Why does it matter? Again, without it, the dashboard's worthless. And again, the easy part is to mine the data. You know, it's this thing that Microsoft has been putting together now for several releases. You know, we're 2012 now, so Project Server first came out really officially in 2002. There was sort of a non-starter version in 2000, but the you know, the robust version of this that mines data, uses OLAP, pulls things out of SQL, renders things through a really awesome SharePoint interface has been around for 10 years. You know, so the technology is really quite fascinating. It's I use this analogy of you know, doing plumbing with golden pipes. I mean, that's kind of what we're doing at this point. We've got some really solid, shiny, you know, flashy kind of stuff we can send data through. But the question is, what are you putting through the pipes, right? If we're not putting drinkable water through the pipes, then nobody's going to want to consume it. And that's really what renders this dashboard worthless. This idea that have we really thought about the inputs and the processes, that infrastructure around the project managers that needs to happen in order to meet these challenges. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and use a couple examples here of the business intelligence. And what we're going to do is we're going to show some examples from Project Server. And one of the first things I'm going to do is switch over to the demonstration. And I'll be there just a moment. Okay, you see the demonstration? Okay, good. So here we have a couple of top-level buttons, if you will, really, or groups of dashboards we can click on. So the first thing I want to think about here is this portfolio of key performance indicators, and these are primarily the cost, the budget, and the schedule indicators. So let's go ahead and I'm going to click down here anywhere in this area, and bring up a dashboard here. And in this particular dashboard, we see a summary of cost indicators, health indicators, quality, resource, and schedule. And what's happened is we've got some mathematical equations, some tolerances, if you will, some formulas that have been created to tell us, you know, what the definition of red, yellow, green is, and you know what the definition of a green checkbox is, for example. So the summary indicators are really the derived from the calculations of the information down below. So we see finance, HR, IT, legal operations, sales, and marketing, and a couple of quick points here. If I click on let's say, for example, that I was concerned about the budgetary situation within the IT cost indicator that's red. So if I were to, for example, click on IT, okay, I see I don't know, 8, 10 different projects here. But again, the same set of indicators, and just as I saw on the previous screen, a top-level indicator, which is made up of the various indicators down below. Now, in this case, what was I doing? Well, if I click the back button here for a second, okay, click the wrong button, click back here. Okay, what we see is there's 5 sets of indicators here for the IT projects, okay? And if it's red, that doesn't mean all the projects below it are red, right? So this is where we start getting into what's the validity of all the inputs, right? Are the project managers keeping things up to date? But a common indicator would be maybe an indicator that says a project wasn't baselined, or another example I can use is if the data hasn't been updated for the past 2 weeks or a month or whatever the tolerance levels are for how fresh the data has to be in order to make it credible. Hopefully the last week, maybe. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to drill down and say, okay, let me go into IT and let's see what's going on here. And we see that it turns out that, you know, the cost situation, we see a couple exclamation points. This one probably indicates that either the project hasn't been baselined or the data hasn't been refreshed recently, even though it was baselined. It lacks validity. We see the percent completes are 0 on a few, so that's of concern. But we see one that's done, that's 100% complete. We see one that's 81%. I'm sorry, we see one that's done that's 100% complete. Yes, that's what done is. It's red on the health, but only yellow on the cost. If we look at the 81%, we see that it is also red. But here, I'm curious about the second one. I've got a red cost indicator, and I haven't spent any money yet. Okay, so there's you know, there's already been a change in the budget, let's say, right? This demonstrates that it's possible for a project to be overspending or forecast to overspend its budget before it really comes out of the gate. So apparently from the time this project was approved until the project manager got a hold of it, updated it, and baselined it, there's a problem. So I might want to drill down on that one as well, right? So if, for example, the automated software design architecture upgrade is looking like a problem, I might want to drill down on this one. And now we're getting into, you know, the reflection of what the project managers themselves are doing, right? Are the project managers, in fact, doing their job? And I could even drill it down into, if I wanted to, maybe taking it down to the Gantt chart level, right? To go start saying, well, if the cost is off kilter, maybe it would take me down to a phase level. And in this particular example, this particular demo environment, we can drill down to the task. We can drill down to, you know, very granular details. As a matter of fact, we could open the project if we wanted to. But let's keep it high level for the moment. That's the idea of drilling down the cost and getting down, in fact, into a project level of detail. In this case, it says as of 2/21/2012. So, you know, within the past week, this project has gone red. The next thing we want to talk about is if I were to go back to the dashboards. Okay, if we think about some of the other cost information, we see something here called budget and chargeback. So let's take a drill down on this one. And in this case, one of the budgets that, or one of the things that's driving the budget is this idea of the resource usage. Okay, so I see a lot of different cost information, and I see issues and risks. I see cost by department, and I'm wanting to know something about capacity versus demand. So we see this crooked red line that shows me what the capacity is, and I see the blue bars that show me what the demand is. So again, I might drill down on that one, and now I can see work versus capacity. So I see a sort of a pleasant view, maybe unrealistic in some worlds, of the resource capacity being above the line, if you will, or the demand being below the line for various roles. So we see accounting, it's alphabetical here, analyst, consultant, creative, customer, developer, et cetera. Now I could start to drill down again on those. I could also take a view by project. Okay, so that again uses this assumption that the project managers themselves are accurately reflecting the demands across all the projects that are involved here. You know, I've seen situations where the capacity stays at the resource level and the demand is really the summary of project information. So if the project information is not up to date, this could be a scary, unrealistic view. You know, this could be a view where there's 3 out of 5 projects that aren't even reflected here, and therefore it appears that there's enough capacity to complete the projects when in fact there's 3 projects that haven't weighed in yet that are going to place additional demand on these resources, and we're not getting that picture at the moment. Okay, so from here, what I want to do is I'm going to go back to the dashboard. Okay, and in this case, what I want to do is I want to think about budget performance. And we're going to start to bring in some of these other concepts of what I mentioned at the portfolio level. You know, what's the alignment with the business goals? You know, not only what the project manager is being measured on, which is on time, on budget, on spec, but what about, is this project delivering on the promise? You know, there was some intended benefit to the business, like maybe some return on investment, maybe some internal rate of return against the initial project investment over time. So let's click down into the project or the portfolio budget performance. And in this case, we can see different dimensions. We see the forecasted benefits of $500,000 versus $1 million, or $5 million versus $10 million. I didn't count the zeros yet, and then we see down below the list of the projects that are being performed here. And what I like about bubble charts is you essentially get 4 dimensions here. We could have, for example, not only the forecasted benefits on the y-axis, but on the x-axis we could have maybe something like cost, the color of the bubble reflecting risk, and the size of the bubble being the overall value to the business. Okay, so these are all different ways to render this information. Again, the assumption is that we've got good inputs, right? That this information has validity because of the amount of information we're able to get from the project managers themselves. And we see below the budgeted cost, the forecasted, the actual, some budget variances, what the planned benefits is, what the forecasted benefit is, and if there were variances in that, we could reflect that as well. So the red bubbles could, for example, reflect, if you wanted it to, the variance between the planned benefit and the current forecasted benefit, which is what it's shown down below. Let's go back to the dashboard. And the next thing I want to talk about is similar to the cost conversation we had. In other words, if I wanted to see KPIs on schedule, I could click in that same portfolio KPI dashboard. In this case, I can look down the column of reds for schedule. So I've got some HR projects not going well, some IT projects not going well, some legal going well. But again, what's happening here is the summary says overall for the company, HR, IT, and legal are dragging down the view for all the company projects. So we've got finance, operations, and sales and marketing only yellow, and we've got 3 organizations dragging us down. So we've got an overall summary that says we're in the red, and now the question is what happens if I drill down? Okay, so let's stay with IT. I'll go ahead and drill down to IT again. And in this case, we can look down the schedule, and it looks like we've got one that's way out of whack. I mean, we've got a couple yellows and a couple greens and 2 that were baseline, but if I want to drill down on the one that's not only red in schedule, but several other categories, I might drill down on content filtering, firewall design, and implementation. I again see the summary information. Again, really reliant on the project managers. Now, just a quick philosophical left turn here. one of the questions is, and one of the things we see a lot with these implementations is, are these fields really calculated? Right? In other words, is the schedule indicator the red that the project manager woke up this morning and said, I'm going to flip the red button? Project will enable that kind of thing. You could have an input field in the schedule indicator at the top of the schedule. You could have an input field called R, G, or Y, red, green, or yellow, and have the project manager type that in, right? And we see that, where of course we wouldn't see much red if we allowed that, but we've seen customers who decide that they're not ready to really derive the benefits or derive or calculate the indicators. Why not? Well, our project managers aren't baselining, they're not keeping their schedules up to date. We just want them to tell us how it's going based on whatever their last status meeting was. So that's one way to go about this. But again, the premise of this whole webinar is this idea of realizing the return on your investment from Project Server. It's hard to get to demonstrate an ROI in terms of accuracy of project information if we're just allowing the project managers to provide opinions. Okay, so the assumption again on this demonstration and the derivation, the calculation of those indicators comes from the projects themselves, not from the opinions of the project managers. Okay, so that's that one, and then so we'll go back up to the top dashboards here. And that's sort of that's kind of the demonstration, if you will, of what's possible. The possibilities are endless. I can click on that pie chart and drill down and right mouse click on the project and start seeing how it breaks out by resource or by major phase name. I mean, these are all really very natural things for Project Server to do. The question I would ask is, how do we adopt the vision? How do we as an organization embrace this thing and really get somewhere? And so I want to just spend a minute on why would organizations commit to this? If you're in a spot where there's a question about is this stuff worth investing in? There has to be a belief. What you see on the bottom of every slide here, right? There's got to be a belief we can deliver better, faster, more effective project-based results. I mean, at the end of the day, if we're going to put a dashboard in, it's got to be because we believe we're going to create those disciplines we talked about, those inputs and those processes for the project managers to baseline their plans, to keep their resource demand up to date, to collect the actuals, to reproject the changes, to constantly keep those projects and schedules up to date. If you ask anybody who understands what this project management thing is about, they'll say, well, yeah, of course we would do that because we would see better, faster, cheaper. That's got to be the answer at the end of the day. So the ROI, is really about how do you keep score, right? I mean, how are you going to know how you're scoring? It's just like a baseball player knowing what their batting average is. It's hard to improve without knowing where you stand. And so, can we capture the information currently? In other words, if we're going to show a return on investment, we're going to say faster. The question is faster than what? What's the baseline? For the organization, I mean, not for the projects. But if we say how long an average project takes, could we even say that today? Do we know where we really stand today is the question. So yeah, we want to be better, faster, cheaper, be more cost effective, and the way to achieve that is through some level of transparency. So these dashboards are certainly transparent. I mean, when this technology first came out, and we did demonstrations of KPIs, red light, green light, yellow light dashboards, it was a fairly common question from first and second line managers. So we're going to be sending this stuff up to portfolio line to executive steering committees. Can we filter out the reds? I mean, it was almost too transparent. So the transparency is there. The question is, how do you get there? And our suggestion is this idea of vision, implement, and adopt. The implementation is where a lot of energy gets spent. A lot of organizations spend time with this technology process and people thing around gathering requirements, designing something, developing, installing configuration. Whether it's technology process or training, it's this idea of let's install something, let's get something implemented, let's get something out there. And our suggestion really is that we take a step back and say, well, if we're using technology as an enabler, if we're going to put a Microsoft Project Server in place, how far and how fast are we trying to go here? If we're going to take it up a notch in terms of the level of rigor of the organization, if we're going to improve the maturity of the processes that the project managers are using, which is what we're applying here, right? If we're going to have these dashboards, we're going to have the capacity accurate, we're going to have the demand accurate, we're going to have the baselines, we're going to have the schedules updated. There's this idea that we're moving the organization into some kind of a future state. So the idea of having a vision of what that is, of what that future state's going to be, of what those processes are that don't exist today, of how wide the gap is, we can then create a vision and a roadmap that says, well, what are those tactical things we need to do in order to be able to, you see the deliverables in the first column, to assess what the current state is, to have a vision of where it's going, and then to put a realistic roadmap and schedule in place to actually drive it. So that's our suggestion. There's a lot of, you might have heard project management maturity model. This is our approach to that, and I'll talk about that just for a moment on the next slide. The implementation, obviously, to get the implemented solution, but the one that the one that really receives the least amount of attention, that probably needs the most attention, is this governance or adoption phase. How do we drive the change? If we're going to design new processes and train project managers and put technology in that produces these great dashboards, the ROI really comes out of the governance procedures that drive the adoption of the solution, right? Most of these endeavors result in some level of drop in productivity, right? When we do the implementation, people take a step backwards. It takes them more time to do their job. They feel like they're getting less results from it. So there has to be some way to push the organization from its current state to its improved future state through governance and adoption. And that's really what the third slide is about, or the third stage, if you will. In terms of the first stage, the assessment, visioning, and roadmap, there's some thoughts there. We'll be saving this out to a PDF file. We'll also, for the slides if you need them, we'll also have a recording of the webinar going up to the website. And so all this information is available for review. Also, if you wanted us to come talk to your organization or do a call, we can do that, and I'll talk about that in a moment. What do we do? Well, our value prop is just what it says on the bottom of the slide, right? To deliver better, faster, and more cost-effective project-based results, right? So we provide unique leading-edge portfolio and project management solutions based on those three columns I just talked about, and the whole idea is to do that in a way that makes the organization want to move forward. Organizations don't like to do this stuff because it's risky. To get from that steady state you're in now, which is less than ideal, to that ideal future state, there's risk involved. There's a no man's land we all have to go through. There's a drop in productivity. There's a change in the organization that needs to be driven. So we've got to figure out how we reduce the risk, maximize the ROI, and speed the realization of value so that ROI comes sooner, right? And ultimately to drive the effective organizational change. To do that third stage well is what this is all about. Okay, so we have some practices here. We do project and project server work, as well as SharePoint, the collaboration, training, application development, both inside and outside of project management tools. Project management outsourcing and staffing is, and platinum staffing includes not just project managers, but business analysts, DBAs, sort of senior project leaders, in addition to project managers, and then some add-on products from Microsoft Project. So if you're interested in hearing more about this, we can come out and help you decide what you got to do to be able to improve this thing around project management reporting and how to set up the right technology environments. And resource management is, I got to tell you, it's 80–90% of the conversations we're in with customers. Everybody's worried about it. Everybody seems to have challenges with it. So it really is about this, setting it up right and then driving the change. So if you're interested, Jan's information is here on the screen. It'll also be captured in the webinar. And so I think this is the point, Jan, where we invite folks to turn to the consoles. So, Jan, did you want to describe that, or am I to describe that?
I'll let you know. I think everyone understands how to submit questions to the console. We already talked about that. I have received a few already, so we can get started with those and invite people to continue sending questions while you answer these.
Okay.
Okay, I'll start with the first question I have. What is the best approach for getting executives to pay attention to what dashboards can do?
That's a good question. What's the best approach for getting executives to pay attention to what dashboards can do? Well, we do some implementations where these pilots, for example, proof of concepts, where the dashboards are used as kind of bait on a hook, if you will, where we're trying to get the executives' attention, if you will. Gee, let us show you, what these great things that we can show you what this technology is, and if they're not asking for it, it's pretty difficult to convince executives that they need it. At least that's been my experience. But I've also seen where they want it, but they're not sure what they want. So I think, if you're in, for example, a PMO or, any kind of an organization that's responsible for delivering the kinds of results that we're talking about today, certainly we've seen more success in suggesting what the key performance indicators should be. Sometimes, executives know that they've signed up to improve customer retention or open new markets or increase revenue. I mean, they get that part. That's why they're executives, but they don't necessarily understand how it is that you can check the health of a project. So it's a good idea to help them figure that out, really. I'd make suggestions, show them what's possible. Some of what we showed you today, I think, is pretty simple. Any other questions?
I've got one more that just came in, Gus. What kind of effort is involved in developing project dashboards like the ones we saw today?
The dashboards themselves are pretty simple. If we do, when we lay out if we had a proposal, for example, 33, is that right? If we did a 3-stage proposal that had a price, provision, and implementation and adoption, you might see maybe 4 or 5 months worth of effort to do all that. The dashboard part of it is actually pretty small. It's in a 5 or 6 month effort or a 4 or 5 month effort, it's probably 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the level of the dashboard. So the creation of the dashboards themselves, the effort to do that is pretty straightforward. As I mentioned, the technology pulls information quite readily from sort of the off-the-shelf technology. Some customization was done to show the dashboards you saw today. But Project provides a lot of out-of-the-box functionality too. So that's we see more than half of the dashboards that people are looking for are met out of the box and then and quite simply configured, and the rest of it is done with some custom development work. So I'd say probably less than 20%, probably less than 10% in most cases of the overall effort. Any other questions? Okay, we're going to gift 9 minutes back on people's schedules today. Okay, well then, what I'd like to do is thank everybody for your time and attendance today, and I think that's it. The last slide here. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and conclude today's efforts, and again, thank you all for your attendance.